They said I didn't deserve a future. So I built one. My name is Clara Lane, and when I was 18, my parents handed me a $20 bill and locked the door behind me. Outside, the rain was cold and steady, the kind that doesn't just fall, it lingers. My father called it tough love. My mother said, "Your sister deserves the future, not you." The bill crumpled in my palm, damp and shaking, while their porch light flickered behind me, bright enough to see the door, not bright enough to find my way back. Maybe you've had a moment like that too, the kind that splits your life into a before and after. If you have, stay with me, because sometimes the stories we share are how we remind each other that we made it through the storm. People imagine turning points as loud, full of shouting, slammed doors, final words. Mine was quiet. Just rain, gravel, and the soft click of a deadbolt. I grew up in Bloomington, Indiana, in a house that smelled of motor oil and lemon cleaner. My father, Robert, was an engineer who believed feelings were flaws in the system. My mother, Diane, a bookkeeper obsessed with control, sprayed her hair so stiff it never moved, even when her voice did. And then there was Lena, my older sister, the golden one, the chosen one. Every compliment in that house bent toward her like light seeking its reflection. At dinner, they sat at the oak table while I unfolded the old metal chair from the pantry. Its hinge squeaked every time I sat down, a reminder of where I belonged. Temporary, replaceable. When Lena turned 16, she got a silver Honda with a red ribbon. For my birthday, I got a $25 bookstore card. "You like reading," Mom said. "This should keep you busy." I smiled. I always smiled. In our house, the rule was simple: don't make a scene. I learned early that silence could keep the peace. But silence also erases you. That night, when the rain hit harder and the world turned dark, I realized they hadn't just sent me away. They'd erased the version of me they didn't understand, the girl who built things from scraps, who believed broken didn't mean worthless. I didn't cry. Not yet. I walked down the driveway, the wheels of my suitcase catching in the gravel, the rain blurring everything behind me. Somewhere between the thunder and the hum of my own breath, I whispered, "If no one opens the door for you, build your own." And that's where my story really began. Not inside the house that forgot my name, but out here, in the rain, where no one expected me to survive. The rain didn't stop that night. It followed me down every street, filling the cracks in the pavement until they looked like tiny mirrors. I sat at the bus stop, the same $20 bill pressed between my palms, watching headlights smear into streaks of silver. I told myself I'd wait for the next bus, but the truth was, I had nowhere to go. The buses came and went, and I stayed, small and invisible under the hum of the flickering streetlight. By dawn, the cold had crept so deep into my bones that I couldn't feel my fingers. When the world finally softened into gray, a man's voice broke through the rain. "Miss, are you okay?" He was older, maybe 50, with kind eyes and a paper cup of steaming coffee. "You look frozen," he said, setting it beside me. I tried to answer, but the words came out as fog. He called for help before I could stop him. The sirens came next, soft, distant, almost apologetic. At the hospital, everything smelled like antiseptic and rain-soaked clothes. When I opened my eyes, a nurse leaned over me. Her badge read, Miller. "You're at County General," she said. "You collapsed from exposure." "You're lucky someone found you when they did." Her voice was warm, gentle in a way I hadn't heard in years. She showed me an envelope, the acceptance letter to Indiana State that I'd stuffed in my bag. The ink had bled, but my name was still there. On the plastic band around my wrist, the words read, "Name, Clara Lane, address, unknown." For a moment, I just stared at those words, unknown address. It looked like a wound disguised as information, but the more I stared, the more it began to feel like possibility. A few days later, when the fever broke, Nurse Miller smiled. "There's a place I can send you," she said. "A women's shelter across town. It's safe. They'll help you get back on your feet," so I went. The shelter was called Haven House, a narrow building tucked between a laundromat and a thrift store. The walls were cracked. The air smelled faintly of detergent and metal, but it was warm. They gave me a bed by the window, a folded blanket, and a cup of soup that tasted like relief. That night, the rain returned, tapping gently on the tin roof. Softer now, more like a heartbeat than a punishment. I lay awake listening to it, surrounded by women who breathed quietly in their bunks. Some cried, some whispered to themselves. I didn't speak. I just listened. And for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't hurt. Days turned into a pattern: morning chores, hot tea, cleaning floors, folding donated clothes. The routine gave the hours shape. I liked the rhythm, the predictability of it. It reminded me of the garage I used to hide in at home, where everything had a place and purpose. One afternoon, while helping sort through a box of old electronics, I found a broken clock radio. Its wires were frayed, the buttons missing, but when I held it, something in me stirred. I asked the shelter coordinator, Ruth, if I could keep it. She smiled. If you can make it work, it's yours. That night I sat by the window with a borrowed screwdriver and a small flashlight. My fingers still trembled from the cold, but the motions came back like muscle memory. Unscrew, rewire, test, adjust. When the radio finally buzzed to life, a soft voice filled the room. A late-night jazz station. For a moment, I just stared at it, the faint orange glow of the dial reflecting in my eyes. The women around me were asleep, the world outside still wet and gray. But that sound, static, music, rhythm, it was proof. Proof that something broken could still work again. Proof that I could too. I leaned back against the wall, the hum of the repaired radio filling the space that silence used to own, and whispered the words that would follow me for years. When you have nothing, structure becomes your safety. And with that, the storm inside me began to quiet. The radio became my heartbeat. Every night after lights out, its faint jazz filled the small dorm room at Haven House, steady and alive. The other women teased me about it. That's Clara's music again. But they smiled when they said it. I think they liked knowing the sound meant someone was still awake, still trying. By the third week, I was strong enough to leave the shelter during the day. Ruth, the coordinator, handed me a crumpled flyer one morning. A diner down on 5th and Pine is hiring, she said. Cash pay. The owner's tough, but fair. You might like her. The flyer smelled faintly of coffee and rain. So the next morning, I walked into Alvarez's diner, a narrow corner cafe with a flickering neon sign and a bell that rang when the door opened. The morning rush had just ended. Booths were half empty, the counter still slick with spilled syrup. Behind it, a woman in her 50s wiped down a coffee pot with the kind of focus that comes from years of repetition. Her name tag read, Miss Alvarez. She looked me up and down, shelter jacket, thrift store shoes, hospital bracelet still faint on my wrist. You ever worked in food service? She asked. No, I said honestly. She nodded once, like she'd already decided. Start with the syrup bottles. If you last till Friday, we'll talk. And just like that, I had a job. The first few days were brutal. The air smelled of grease and old coffee, the floor never stopped being sticky, and the orders came faster than I could memorize them. But there was something grounding about it, the clatter of plates, the hiss of the grill, the rhythm of people coming and going. For the first time since leaving home, I wasn't invisible. I was part of a machine that noticed when I was gone. Miss Alvarez wasn't easy to impress. She corrected me often, but her tone was never cruel. People don't pay for food, she told me one afternoon while counting tips. They pay to be remembered. Make them feel like they exist. The words hit deeper than she knew. Then there was Ben, the delivery driver. He was in his late 20s, broad-shouldered, always humming something under his breath as he hauled crates of produce from the truck. He noticed how I organized things, how I stacked boxes by date, color-coded lids, and grouped condiments by brand. One morning, he watched me rearrange an entire shelf before opening time and laughed softly. You always sort stuff like that? Just makes things easier to find later, I said. "You've got a head for systems," he told me. "Most people don't." It was the first compliment I'd received in years that didn't sound like pity. The days at Alvarez's diner began to take shape. Mornings of chaos, afternoons of calm, evenings when the rain hit the windows and the city lights turned everything gold. On slow nights, I borrowed napkins and sketched tiny maps, delivery routes, supplier addresses, notes about which vendors came when. It reminded me of the broken radios I used to fix. Different pieces, same principle. Everything connects. One night, Miss Alvarez found one of my napkins on the counter. She studied it for a long time before folding it and slipping it into her apron. "You did this?" she asked. "Just trying to help with deliveries," I said, embarrassed. She nodded. "Keep that brain sharp, Clara." Not many people can see patterns like that. It'll take you somewhere I didn't know it then, but that napkin was the first blueprint of the life I was about to build. Over the next few weeks, the diner became my classroom. I learned how inventory worked, how schedules could break if one piece slipped, how a single delay rippled through everything. When Ben's truck broke down one morning, I used the shelter's old computer to call suppliers and rearrange the day's deliveries. Everything still arrived on time. Ben laughed when he found out. "You're basically my human GPS now." Sometimes after closing, I stayed behind, sitting in the corner booth with a cup of lukewarm coffee, the rain whispering against the glass. I'd pull out a small notebook and start drawing again, routes, graphs, lists. Every line I drew felt like control returning, one small victory at a time. One night, Ben sat across from me and asked, "What do you want to do, Clara?" "Like, really?" I hesitated. "I don't know." "Well," he said, "figure it out. You're too smart to stay wiping counters forever." That night I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my head long after the rain stopped. Maybe I didn't know what I wanted yet, but I was learning how to build toward it. When you've been invisible your whole life, the first person who sees you doesn't just give you hope. They hand you a mirror. And for the first time, I didn't look away. The diner became my foundation, the first place that didn't vanish beneath me. Morning rushes, clinking plates, the rhythm of Ben's truck pulling up at the back door. It all formed a kind of heartbeat. Every small task felt like proof that I could keep something running. But as the weeks passed, something inside me started reaching further, like a root pressing through concrete. At night, I brought my small notebook to the shelter's computer lab. The flicker of the monitor painted my face in blue light as I watched free online courses on logistics, supply chains, and warehouse management. I didn't know it then, but I was studying the language of order, the same instinct I'd had as a kid fixing broken radios, now written in spreadsheets and formulas. "When you have nothing," I whispered to myself one night, staring at a chart of delivery schedules, "structure becomes your safety." I tested everything I learned at the diner. I reorganized the supply shelves by turnover rate, matched condiment refills to customer flow, built a rotation system for ingredients. Within weeks, we stopped running out of bacon on weekends. Orders came faster. Waste went down. Even Miss Alvarez noticed. "You did something right," she said one Friday evening, balancing the week's receipts in her hands. "We made 15% more this month, and nobody quit." I smiled, still wiping the counter. "It's just small adjustments." She shook her head. "Small adjustments make big differences, Clara." Don't forget that night after closing, she sat beside me at the counter. "You ever think about going back to school?" she asked. "I tried once," I said softly. "Didn't work out." "Then make it work this time," she said. "You've got a brain that builds things. Don't waste it cleaning tables forever." Her words stayed with me, like static in the background of every thought. A week later, Ben arrived at the diner with a new logo on his truck, Everline Freight. His delivery company had just merged with another local firm. He looked exhausted but proud. "We're expanding," he said between bites of sandwich. New routes, new offices, they're hiring data clerks, logistics assistants, entry-level stuff. You should apply. Me? I laughed. I don't even have a degree. So what? He shrugged. You've been running this diner better than most operations I've seen. That's experience. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up at the shelter's desk, typing my first resume on the old computer. It was short, too short. I listed Alvarez's diner, my duties, and every skill I could name: inventory management, scheduling, supplier coordination. When I printed it, the ink smudged on one corner, but it felt like something real. A week later, the call came. A man named Tom, the operations manager at Everline Freight, wanted to interview me. Miss Alvarez ironed one of her blouses for me, pressing it carefully like she was ironing courage into the fabric. Before I left, she slipped a 20 into my hand. Lunch money, she said when I tried to protest. Don't argue. The office sat near the port, where the air smelled of diesel and sea salt. The waiting room was small, the kind that hums with fluorescent lights and second chances. Tom was broad-shouldered, with a voice like gravel and eyes that missed nothing. You don't have a degree, he said, scanning my resume. No, I said, but I've been running logistics for a diner that handles 6 suppliers and 3 delivery routes every week. He leaned back, a slow grin forming. You're organized under pressure. That's worth more than paper. Let's start you on data entry. I nodded, trying not to cry. When I stepped out of that building, the wind off the docks smelled like rain again. But this time, it wasn't cold. It was clean, fresh, the kind of air that means something new has started. That night, I walked back to the diner to tell Miss Alvarez and Ben. She didn't say much, just smiled, small and proud. Ben grinned wide and raised his coffee cup. Told you, he said. You're built for bigger routes. I smiled back, the words catching in my throat. For the first time since that night outside my parents' house, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was moving forward. When you've spent your whole life fixing what's broken, eventually you start dreaming of building your own. And without knowing it, that dream had already begun. Everline Freight was nothing like the diner. The air smelled of ink and diesel, not coffee and syrup. Rows of desks filled a converted warehouse where trucks roared outside like restless animals. My first desk sat near a window that faced the loading docks, and every morning when the sun hit the metal doors, it glowed like a beginning I hadn't dared to imagine. At first, I was just the quiet one, the new hire who triple-checked numbers and stayed late when no one asked her to. But data entry turned into inventory tracking into route planning. The work felt like a language I already spoke. Logistics wasn't chaos. It was choreography. Every shipment, every route, every delay had a rhythm, and for the first time, I got to conduct it. Tom, the operations manager, noticed. He'd wander by my desk, coffee in hand, and test me with sudden questions. You ever reroute a delivery around a weather delay? You know what happens when a driver's hour limit hits mid-route? I answered everyone, sometimes wrong, mostly right. He was the first boss who didn't look at me like I was lucky to be there. He looked at me like I belonged. One evening, after most of the team had left, he leaned on my cubicle wall and said, You ever notice how routes are like people? Every detour's got a reason. The trick is knowing when to reroute and when to push through. Those words stayed with me. I started coming in early, staying late, learning the back-end systems from old manuals no one used anymore. When drivers called in sick or shipments got lost, I was the one who stayed calm, mapping alternate routes while everyone else panicked. The company grew, and somehow I grew with it. 2 years passed. I'd saved enough for a small apartment, one with a window that leaked when it rained but still felt like mine. On my desk at work, I taped the hospital bracelet from County General to the corner of my monitor. The words "unknown address" were still faintly visible, a reminder of what I'd survived. When a senior coordinator quit unexpectedly, Tom didn't hesitate. You're already doing half their job, he said, tossing a folder onto my desk. Might as well get the title. That promotion changed everything, not just the paycheck, but the way people saw me. Colleagues came to me for help, drivers called me the calm one, and Tom started saying things like, "You've got a knack for structure." The world runs better when people like you are in charge. But the truth was, I wasn't chasing status. I was chasing purpose. I saw too many small businesses collapse because no one had taught them how to stay organized. People with heart and skill, just lost in the noise. I recognized them. They reminded me of myself. The idea started as a sentence scribbled in the margins of my notebook. What if small businesses could run like big ones, without losing their soul? It kept me up at night. I'd stare at the glowing city outside my apartment window, the hum of traffic below, and imagine a company built not from privilege but from empathy, a company that fixed what was broken, the way I'd been fixing my own life all along. The next morning I told Tom, "I've been thinking," I said carefully. "What if I started something?" Consulting for smaller firms, helping them build systems that last, he smiled without surprise. "You're either crazy or brave," he said. Then he handed me his old stapler. "You'll need this." Every empire starts with paper. I left Everline with shaking hands and $3,000 in savings. My first office was a tiny space above a print shop with a leaky ceiling, a second-hand desk, and a heater that worked when it felt generous. I didn't care. I called it Emerge Talent Solutions. And on the wall above my desk, I framed 3 things: the hospital bracelet, the faded $20 bill, and a handwritten motto, "Built from the ground up." That's how it all began. Again, not from comfort, but from clarity. And I had no idea that one day the past I'd outrun would walk back through my door. It happened 5 years after that night in the rain. My company had grown, new offices, new clients, a team that believed in what we built. On the wall behind my desk hung the 3 things that had shaped my life: the hospital bracelet, the faded $20 bill, and the company logo framed beneath the words, "Built from the ground up." That morning, my assistant Maya walked in with her tablet. "New applicant for the operations coordinator position," she said. "Strong resume, 3 years at Greenway Logistics." She paused. "Her name's Lena Brown." Time slowed. The same name I'd once whispered through tears under a storm. My sister, the golden one. I could have said no. I could have deleted the file. But I didn't. "Schedule the interview," I said. 2 days later, Lena walked in, still polished, still perfect, except for the faint tremor in her hands. She didn't recognize me at first. I kept my voice steady, professional. "So," I said, "tell me about a time you had to handle fairness within a team." Her practiced smile faltered. "Fairness means making sure everyone gets what they deserve." I met her eyes. "I agree." Her gaze drifted to the wall, the framed $20 bill, the bracelet, the motto, and her face changed. "You're," she whispered. I nodded slightly. "We're here to discuss your qualifications." The silence that followed wasn't revenge. It was reflection. She had her chance to speak. I had mine to forgive. Quietly. When the interview ended, she stood, eyes glistening. "You've done well for yourself." "So have you," I said. "Life has a strange way of finding balance." After she left, I stood at the window, rain sliding down the glass, the same rhythm that had once followed me through every storm. Only now, it sounded like peace. I touched the frame on the wall and whispered, "They said I didn't deserve a future. I built one anyway." If you've ever been told you weren't enough, remember, what breaks you can also rebuild you. And if stories like this remind you that healing can start anywhere, even in the rain, tap the heart, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Because somewhere out there, someone's still standing in the storm, and your voice might be the light they need to find their way home.